I barely made it to my plane. The departure time was 11:30 p.m. on New Year's Eve, and I made it to my gate at 11:05 p.m. I was fortunate that the crew allowed me on the flight. I took a military leave from Honolulu to go see family in Seattle. I was partying with my army friends and had lost track of when my flight was going to leave. But none of that matters right now because my ticket was scanned and I'm heading onto the plane. When I got on the plane, I knew my seat was 15C. I could tell I was really late because there wasn't a flight attendant to greet me when I got on the plane. The lights on the plane were dim, so I had to pay close attention to see what aisle I was passing. It seemed like everyone had drank too much alcohol prior to getting on the plane, because everyone was passed out. I finally found my aisle seat, and a pre-recorded video came on regarding "in case of emergency," which I just tuned out. Shortly after the video, the plane took off on the runway. The flight was going to be over 6 hours long, and I still had a buzz from drinking earlier. My mouth started to get dry, and I figured within the hour that the flight attendants would pass out refreshments. In the meantime, I went through my phone and looked over some photos that I had taken over the past few months. It has been an hour, and still the flight attendants haven't come around with refreshments. In fact, I haven't seen any of the flight attendants since I got on the plane. I figured that they're working on a skeleton crew because of the New Year holiday, so I pushed the button above my head to summon a flight attendant. After pushing the button, there's a red light that blinks with a continuous ding 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 sound. This sound went on for at least 5 minutes, and none of the flight attendants came to see what I wanted, which I thought was extremely odd. Also, I sat on the aisle seat with the middle seat empty, and a guy who has been passed out facing the window the whole flight, who didn't wake up from the sound of me pressing the bell lights. As I looked around, I saw that just about all of the passengers are snuggled into a blanket or they have a sweatshirt hoodie draped over their head. The plane has at least 100 passengers, and no one has woken up or gone to use the bathroom yet either. I'm starting to get an eerie feeling about this flight. I know I'm a little drunk, but the silence is deafening. So I decided to get up and walk up and down the aisle. I quickly discovered that there's not a single flight attendant on the plane. I'm not an expert, but I would imagine that there has to be an FAA regulation regarding a minimal amount of crew on board any commercial flight. I now feel concerned and frantic. I want to discuss this with another passenger on board. I continue to walk up and down the aisle, hoping that someone would wake up. There's not a single light on the plane, and everybody's window is down, so I can't see more than 5 inches away. I became desperate, so I called out, "Hello? Hello? Is anyone awake?" I get an eerie feeling again that something isn't right when I don't get a response. So I raised my voice higher, and still I got no response. So I decided to put my hand on the closest person's seat, and I shake it back and forth, and I continually say, "Hello? Hello?" with no response. I repeat this as I walk up and down the aisle on other seats, and no one wakes up. I don't know if everyone's dead, so I reach above the closest person's head, and I push the button to turn their light on. The guy has a hoodie covering his face, and he's facing the window, so I grab his left shoulder and tilt him towards me. He makes no movements when I do this, so I remove the hoodie that's concealing his head, and as I do that, I say, "What the hell?" I see that it's not a person, but a dummy mannequin that looks like someone you would practice CPR on. I am at a loss for words, so I check the other passengers and discover that they are all dummy mannequins. I plop myself down in the closest seat, and now I'm completely puzzled. I feel like a test crash dummy, and I start to get consumed with that thought. I always had a mistrust with the army, and they helped me book this flight, so I'm questioning what death trap they put me on. I walk quickly up to the pilot's cabin and I bang on the door with no response. I repeatedly bang on the door and I yell, "Help! Is there anyone in there?" No one answers, so I'm getting more and more convinced that there is no one flying the plane. I rush back and get my carry-on suitcase from the overhead compartment. The bag has to weigh about 35 pounds, so I use it to ram the pilot's cabin door. I intermittently use the bag and I kick the door. After a while, the door starts to become loose from its frame. With a few more kicks, the door opens up, and I say, "Oh, you have got to be kidding me! Because there is no one there! No pilot, no co-pilot!" I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. My dad flew a bush plane to bring tourists to remote hunting areas. He died when I was 14, and my mother and I moved to Washington State to live with her parents. Before he died, my dad had me flying the single-engine plane that he owned, so I had a rough understanding of planes. However, this Boeing jet has more controls than a nuclear power plant. It's obvious this plane is on autopilot. From the latitude, longitude, and mileage readings, I can tell that I'm over the Pacific Ocean and above the clouds. I pick up the radio and realize that it's dead. It looks like the radio wires were purposely cut. As I sit in the pilot's chair, I don't know where this autopilot is programmed to this plane to go. I can tell that the plane is slowly losing altitude, and I can start to see the Pacific Ocean as the plane starts to descend from the clouds. The water is choppy and is not conducive for a safe landing. My dad landed planes on all types of terrains, and he stressed to me which environments were safe enough to land. Looking down on the ocean waves, I know that they will tear apart this plane, and I will most likely drown or die on impact. So I decide to disengage the autopilot, which is a fairly straightforward thing to do because there's a switch labeled autopilot. Then I attempt to maneuver the jet as I did with my dad's single-engine Piper Bush plane. A lot of the principles to flying are the same, despite the extra bells and whistles this Boeing has. I figure if I head northwest, then I would obviously be either at Oregon or in Washington State. Then if I head up to the furthest northwestern position, then I know I will be at the corner of Washington State, where I wouldn't be far from Seattle's airport if I would then fly the plane in an easterly position. So I purposely slow the plane down to give other planes an opportunity to maneuver around me, and I flew close to the water so I could visualize when I see land. About a half an hour later, I spotted the coast of the United States, and as I had planned, I headed north. Fortunately, after a few minutes, I started to see miles of coastal vegetation, and I figured that it must be the Olympic National Park in the state of Washington. As I turn the plane in an eastern position, I see a big mountain, which I assume is Mount Olympus, which I have driven by countless of times. I know to head east to look for Seattle Space Needle, and to look for Mount Rainier as focal points. I see in the plane's built-in radar that there are 3 fast-moving flying aircrafts coming in my direction. I know now that I've made it to land, and that they won't shoot me down as I assume that they are fighter jets. As the aircrafts get close, I know my assumption was correct as I started seeing the fighter jets. The one jet slows down and positions itself to the left of my plane. I can't tell for sure what the pilot is trying to tell me, but it looks like he wants me to fly back towards the water. I know that my survival would be close to 0 by either being shot down by the fighter jets or crashing into the water. So I just ignore the fighter jet's instructions. I do know by now that I have given the air traffic controllers an ample enough of time to spot my plane on their radar and clear the runways. As I fly east, I start to see Seattle, and I head towards Mount Rainier, where I know the mountain is the back landscape of the airport. I try my best to keep my composure as I start to see the airport. After a few minutes, I figure out the correct switch to lower the landing wheels. I'm profusely sweating to the point where I intermittently use my shirt to dry off my face. I try my best to ignore the plane's fancy gadgets, and I try to picture the Boeing as my dad's bush plane where I continually adjusted the throttle. I see a long open runway and position the plane to land. All of the same principles are the same, from landing a single engine to a multiple engine jet aircraft. I steady and lower the plane. I pull back on the control column when the wheels make contact with the ground, and within seconds, the plane stops. The military has personnel that approach the plane. The military personnel yell instructions at me on how to open the door. Once I open the door, Air Force personnel pat me on the back and say, "Good job." I go down the stairwell and I'm directed towards the nearest terminal. I enter the terminal and no one greets me or questions me. I call my mother and she comes to pick me up. To date, no one has ever questioned me about the landing I performed. I brought it up to my commanding officer, and he looked at me like I had 3 heads. Nothing had made the news either, and life returned back to normal for me. Still, I can't help but think that I was being used by the military as some sort of guinea pig that wasn't meant to survive.